Good evening. Looks like we just have a couple more people trickling in. Thank you. And thanks to those of you who are waiting on the Zoom. I know there's often a bit of dead air when you're just sitting there at your desk or whatever in front of your screen and nothing is happening, but it's nice to see people coming out this evening. And we are really delighted to welcome Baseera Khan here to the Columbus Museum of Art. My introduction, as is typical, is going to be very short. But just to say, well, I can say it. Baseera Khan was born in Denton, Texas, lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. I mean, she recently had just last year a solo exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum as part of the Wovo Prize for Brooklyn artists. Also the Kitchen, Simone Subal Gallery, who we have to thank as well this evening. But upcoming solo exhibitions include the Public Art Fund, the Atlanta Contemporary in Atlanta, Georgia, the Moody Center for the Arts at Rice University at Houston, Texas, and here in Ohio, the Contemporary Arts Center in Cincinnati, and that will be this September. So mark your calendars, look on the CAC website and get more details there. This talk is occasioned really by the acquisition of a work out of an exhibition at the Wexner Center for the Arts right here, called Climate Changing, an artist sorry, I don't have the title in front of me, on artists, social environments, and institutions, I believe it was. But an excellent show. And that work, the acquisition of that work was funded by our very own Contemporaries group, many of whom are here this evening, and we thank you all for your support for the museum and its acquisition program in this way. The work, I arrive in place in a state of psychic distress, pink, a high level of psychic. I knew I was getting that wrong. But it is pink. Yeah, I've got sort of a voice in the wings here. Is upstairs in the Walter Wing in an installation of works that have been acquired through the Contemporaries group over the years. So I encourage you to go and see that installation if you haven't already. But with that, let me bring out Baseera Khan. Thank you.
Hello. Hello. In honor of the recent acquired work, I'm wearing a pink blazer. All right, I hope there's some friendly faces out there. I'm going a little blind. The other thing is, thank you for coming out. I know things get really difficult these days. So I'm going to take you on a wild ride. I have about 250 slides, but I go fast. So no fears. Come join us. So the way that I am setting up this PowerPoint presentation, maybe some of you have seen it, is I like to front load some kind of like where I am in the world, like the positionality of my body or any kind of questions that you may have about where my mind is. Because at the end of these talks, sometimes we have questions. So what I'm learning to do is like front load those questions at the front so that maybe in the back, you can ask me more questions that are more like about how I'm a material girl. So let's get started. Ha ha ha. That's not the one. Sorry, I'm leading you astray, not leading the way. That's for later. Can I have some elbow room in this cannon? The cannon is a cannon. A body, an armchair weapon. One that refuses my care, but insistently rules over my body. Applies mainstream principles and standards. Sex plus violence equals art history. In a field where I race for my race as the cannon sits far away. Axiomatic, universally binding. With little to no experience to judge me or my kin. It's a damn shame. There's no legacy that I may follow, and my pain is my intimacy. Intimacy is what defines my politics. So I make work on my own terms from what I see. 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 Okay, I haven't quite figured out my tech game yet, so I just have to turn my PowerPoint off and on. I kind of like it that way. So let's get started. I want to start off showing you my work by explaining this kind of project that's ongoing called I Am Muslima. Sometimes it's called I Am Muslima, sometimes it's called Reading Room on Purpose. It started off by me wanting to house my Nike shoes that I was making because I have a couple of shoes that I really want to take care of. So I just decided I may not have a lot of furniture, but maybe I can turn like a coffee table into a shoe case or a shoe case into a coffee table. So I started thinking about entranceways to spiritual centers such as mosques. And, this is kind of what you see. So I started to further look into it and notice that places like Wayfair, what have you, have the Nike shoe development already. And as I was making my Nike shoe in 2016, some of you may know this, the words that you can inscribe onto the shoe at the time, you could inscribe about 6 letters. Now, we couldn't really inscribe the word Muslim and Islam on the shoe at the time because apparently it incited violence. So that caused a huge lawsuit and boycott. But that kind of tumbled us forward into the Hillary Clinton Trump moment, right? And I was preparing myself for a solo exhibition at Participant Inc. in the Lower East Side of New York. Everyone should support and love that place, by the way. And so I was kind of excited about the world being taken over by a femme person, regardless of who they were. And we were all getting excited about naming the title in a femme way. So we wanted to call the show I Am Muslima. And at that time, we ended up just kind of smushing the words together, kind of like you do on Twitter or what have you, to get the embroidery on the shoe. And then the shoe came to me. So this is kind of a unique shoe that is in my repertoire. But quickly thereafter, the lawsuit and the entrance of a new president, there was, as you can probably remember, a lot of friction about identity in the United States. So along with that, there was a lot of protests, say in NFL football, in a lot of like celebrity people were trying to kind of like take a stand or take a knee. And so Nike decided to use that momentum to cover up the boycott. So why am I getting into this? I'm really interested in the way that economies and corporations, the kinds of like big houses that house us essentially create identity. I'm interested in the way that materials themselves are excavated by humans. Humans are also a resource, and how that very act of material creates an industry of identity. So, we're all complicit in that. But for example, one of the things I like to do is just kind of follow fashion houses and, different places that I desire, because I think about desire and surveillance in this same box. It's very close in my mind, these big ideas. So instead of the Nike Corporation trying to make space for a person who wanted to define themselves on the shoe, they went ahead and redesigned the way that you make the shoe to where is this on? To where you only could put the first, second, and middle and last name on the shoe itself. So that kind of resolved a lot of issues, because meanwhile, people like Colin Kaepernick were becoming the face of America, but also the face of Nike. And Nike was also employing gorgeous Black and brown women athletes with hijabi wicks. She looks pretty cool, right? But I mean, the whole economy around the Nike Corporation was actually expanding its bottom line, but it wasn't really resolving that tension. But what it was doing was eliminating anybody putting their religion on the shoe itself. So I went ahead and bought a bunch of shoes so that I could spell out sentences. That's kind of how I resolved the issue. So, by the way, at the time, there was also a lot of censoring of particular words, such as fetus, transgender, diversity from the CDC. So you can only imagine what that was doing for health issues for people that were potentially marginalized by those acts. And going back to the art world, the St. John the Divine Church is one of the largest Episcopalian churches in the world. In fact, I think it is the largest church in the world. They're stationed in East Harlem, and they asked me to show the reading room on purpose, which is a selection of a lot of books that I kind of turned to in graduate school and turned to kind of find answers about where I am and who I am. And that bibliography grows every time I share Reading Room on Purpose. I share that with the staff or the curators or whomever is helping me do that. So if I could ever get an intern to stay in my studio, I would love to create a bibliography that would sit on my website so everyone can enjoy that list. That will happen soon. The funny thing about this particular situation, I got caught up in all the politics, right? Politics, Wayfair. And And then I forgot that the reason why I even wanted to make the shoe itself was because I was trying to stunt on my students that were making their own shoe instead of paying attention to me in my photography class. So I was trying to one up them to make my shoe, right? That was the whole reason I even got into it. And so I'm showing you this because the last day of this show at the Episcopalian church, someone came in and stole the shoe. Now, I totally forgot about sneaker culture because I got wrapped up in the politics of like the boycott and what have you. So, one of the things that I try not to forget about making artwork is it's very autonomous and sometimes it tells you what it needs. And this project continues to grow. I learned a lot about just simply making the shoe, a lot about my vanity, a lot about the way in which I, as a person, can make smart choices. So instead of allowing for this person to go to prison because it was larceny, I worked with the dean of the church and the DA's office of New York City to get him to do a plea bargain if he helped us get the shoe back. So the shoe did come back. It's a size 8.5, but it seemed like he was trying to stuff his foot in it because he was like a size 11 or something. So I have a lot of slides, so I really need to get past this. But I do want to tell this story because so I get the shoe back. The guy is now going to have to like mop the floors for a couple of years. It's probably going to be good for him. He's not going to prison. That's the point. But I find out that the biggest fabric and textile conservator in the world is like literally in East Harlem. So those of you who are working with textiles, find this church because they were able to reconstruct my shoe. And they have like a huge campus with peacocks and like growing farms and cows, and it's awesome, and it's in New York City. So anyway, I'm moving on. You learn a lot from your artwork. So these are just other examples of the reading room on purpose. They're usually in these acrylic boxes that I formed, a stack of some of the books, and the way that these books are stationed at the Brooklyn Museum currently, and this is an image of the Brooklyn Museum, is that you know, the books are sitting there on these tables, and then you can kind of go in on them and write your annotations, or if you want to doodle or something like that. So over the course of the year, I'll be gathering these books and see what all of you have to say through those books. And again, there's also this book that I've been making. It's a picture book, but it kind of goes in and shows you all of the inspiration and ways in which I'm thinking and moving through my artwork. And this book is also available at the Brooklyn Museum currently. And this is an example of, you know, any given day you go into the reading room on purpose at the Brooklyn Museum and you can see these different drawings. This right now is in New Haven at Art Space, and it's another version of the reading room. So sometimes you'll see the prayer rugs that I make in that space as well. And here are the prayer rugs. So the prayer rugs, the big idea was me thinking about a found object and wanting to utilize that found object, a prayer rug, and, you know, kind of imbibe the surface with my own lived experience. So one of the things I wanted to do with these rugs is graphically design my own impressions of what it means to have sovereignty, because I assume if you're meditating, you're trying to find sovereignty over yourself and others. So I started looking at protest posters, and I thought that it would be a beautiful idea to blend the graphics and the histories of people demonstrating for one another to have more rights into the prayer rugs themselves. So oftentimes they're found in the reading room on purpose, and people are welcome to sit upon them and experience them with gratitude. And they are hand embroidered in Kashmir and hand dyed. One funny anecdote about the work is that when I'm making these graphics, I send them through WhatsApp on my iPhone, because I know the person in Kashmir has an iPhone, and we have like this litmus test for the color as we look at our iPhones. And I have this funny anecdote about how you get a Starbucks coffee, and it's the same Starbucks coffee anywhere in the world, and you get the same thing with an iPhone. The other thing is the I Am a Body rug was supposed to be the color of my skin. So I got one of those skin tests to get the pigment for my makeup, because at some point in 2017, I was like, let me go high femme. Let's try that. So I started wearing makeup. And, I sent that CMYK over and it ended up being orange. But there's a lot of photographic theory around how the skin tone is never obtainable in photography and painting. So that was kind of interesting for me. Okay, and this is an example of the way in which it can be arranged as well, just showing you different ways. Acoustic blankets kind of comes from also a bit of personal archiving and imagining the futures. These are 6 albums that my father brought over to America, and I plan to make the 7th album, which I have finally done. So that album is completed, and if you are lucky enough to go and visit the Brooklyn Museum before July 10th, you can hear the album, but I have some music to share with you tonight. In terms of the album itself being pressed, well, Adele has junked up the system, and all these big stars have junked up the system. So I can't even get a record pressed until 2024. But I'm working on it. We're going to see what we can do about that. He was kind of a note taker. He was responsible of trying to figure out who was born, who was dying, where people were in places of conflict. Sometimes those are not details that are readily available to you unless you take it upon yourself to take those records. And then I throw this slide in because it was strange to me, the kind of artwork that I was inspired by early on. Growing up in Denton, Texas, and just in the triplex area, there were a lot of I would say Walter Gropius groupies that went in and like created these huge museums. And just being around that kind of campus, like the Fort Tato Undo and like Louis Kahn and like just like huge architects would descend upon Dallas and Fort Worth and build out these huge, beautiful mausoleums, basically art houses. And so I would see Richard Serra's and like huge installations of minimalist art. And all the while I was thinking about like Islamic narratives and how like similar some of those narratives were to the ideas in minimalist art itself. So I threw this in here because later on, I mean, I'm also throwing these slides in here to show you that I have like this weird drawing practice. I usually draw a lot deep in the winter time because I don't like to move my body when it's really cold outside. So I just throw on a bunch of grow lights and sit on my dinner table and draw. So I, here we have a kind of like maximalist, minimalist artwork that's kind of combined together. Sort of didn't think about this work at all. This work had a whole life. And then as I was touring with the work and kind of creating a narrative for it, I realized how similar the aesthetics were to the kinds of traditions in minimalist art itself. So the object itself, it's acoustic blanket. I didn't really come into art through art itself. I kind of came into art through music. Growing up in Denton, there was just like a huge music school and lots of bands that would play. And I held a house that had a recording studio in it, and we would do live music. And throw really big parties that would get out of hand. And so I'm telling you this because I would bring acoustic blankets into the bathroom, which is what I learned is the best place to get a clean recording, which is why sometimes if you're singing in the bathroom and you sound good, and then you try to go out to the mall and sing again, you sound bad. It's because there's something about singing in that closed space that gives you clarity. And so I would take these blankets into the bathroom, cut holes out for light and to pass equipment in and out. That's kind of, a lot of the things I do come from like a need to do something, like something that I'm not even thinking about it as art. So that's kind of how it entered into my life, and then I started aestheticizing it and creating these gold portals, these patterns around them, and these patterns come from my mom's side of the family collecting patterns for generations. So some of these patterns are more than 100 years old, and they would embroider them onto clothing for weddings or for people that are getting born, or even tablecloth. So I performed under them because at the time I was very shy and I really wanted to write this record, but I couldn't perform. I couldn't even do what I'm doing now in front of you without having a panic attack. So I got under the blanket and everything was fine. Like you couldn't see me and I couldn't see you and it was all good. So I would invite people up. This is Kaya, my producer, who was also in a band called Raina Maria. I don't know if those of you who are indie rock fans might remember that band. But this is at the Whitney. It was the hottest day of the year, 2017, I believe. So I would call people up and, be like, I want to talk to somebody in a red shirt. And so if somebody volunteered, we would start to kind of like, understand each other in a different way other than the visual. We're trying to find a different way to relate other than the kind of typical avatar of our bodies. And then it just went bananas. So lo and behold, I don't even know what lo and behold means, actually, if anybody wants to help me out later. It got out of control. The performances got out of control. I went all over the place. I was sort of like a weird blanket girl touring the country, singing songs to people, doing an Andy Kaufman routine, and like even stealing the works from shows and going out to protests, doing selfies, holding hands with people who would let me hold their hands. And the Guggenheim ended up wanting to purchase these blankets, which was actually the first artwork that was ever bought, which is just weird and magical. And it just goes to show, make whatever you want and they will come. Kevin Costner said that. This is just my mom. I just wanted, my poor mom, she's only 4'5". She's the one who taught me how to wear platform shoes because she would make, like, on Eid day, which is coming up pretty soon, she'd make these big pots of biryani. They were like really tall pots. And so like she'd literally be on. So she had these huge, awesome clogs that she would wear just to like be the right height to like, anyway, I get all my moves from her. That's actually just a piece of public art, right? Like a general we've seen some public art, like you're driving me around to see some public art. And so, I actually saw this Richard Serra get care flighted into the Modern at Fort Worth. And fast forward to 2018, Texas also wanted me to tour. And so I asked the Modern if I could do like a performance with Richard Serra's sculpture where I'm kind of loving and hating it at the same time. I brought horn players into the center of it. And I would throw my I Am Muslima shoes as high as I could to try to catch the top of this building, of this structure, which is impossible. It's even taller than the Modern itself. So it was kind of like an impossible act. And I think that you're going to see that as a pattern for me when I'm thinking about aesthetics. I'm thinking about like impossible forms and contortions. So as I was preparing for the show, I realized, well, I didn't realize, somebody helped me realize. A historian told me that David Hammonds had been doing this work in their own fashion, in their own history. In 1981, this is a Richard Serra sculpture that was placed in Tribeca. Totally different histories, but it's really interesting to tap into a psychic space because I really didn't know anything about that work. And it was really cool to be doing my own version of it 20 years later. So this I like to put it in because sometimes I work with my students or I have to do lectures at schools. And so it's kind of cool to just then show the simple blanket itself sitting there in a gallery. Okay, Braid Rage. Braid Rage is another one of those weird installations that you wonder why people say yes to you. So I start off again with drawings and small little prototyping. And again, it was like a system for me to like relieve stress. And I was trying to learn how to rock climb. And it kind of turned into me realizing this is just like painting. And I studied painting in school. And so I started to design my own rock climbing wall through pouring resin pores of the corners of my own body. So these are some examples of what those look like. And inside of each resin pour is wearable chains, hypothermia blankets, and hair. Oops. So this is kind of the example of what that looks like. And initially for the first performance, I used this long hair braid to climb, which I learned very quickly not to do that. I used charcoal to clarify myself at the beginning. So I did kind of like an ablution so I could prepare myself and center myself. It was a little bit like getting under the blanket, but in this occasion, it's doing something that I used to do 5 times a day, every day since I can remember. So it was like calming to do something ritualistic. And then it was also so wrapped into the culture of rock climbing itself. You have to use chalk to like cover your paws because you have all these oils on your paws, right? So I just decided to turn my whole body into a drawing instrument, a recording device, so that I could record myself exerting myself climbing the wall. And I would try to scale it 4 times. And in the meantime, making a drawing. So this was the first iteration of Braid Rage at Participant that I climbed in February 26, 2017. And, you know, it's not abnormal for people to sit and watch you climb. So that was also part of the culture of it. When you climb, everyone's climbing with you. And as you can see, I didn't use harnesses for that first event, which I'll never do again. And this was the result. Right now at the Brooklyn Museum of Art, there is a film of it because in 2020, dun dun dun, the New Orleans Museum of Art asked me to come and install at their museum, and I didn't think that was a great idea. So what I did instead was ask them to commission a film. So I think in a way, like the Brooklyn Museum having the film as well, it's a more generous offer to have people come in and sit and watch a really well-made film instead of like having that one exclusive night where only 50 people see it, right? This is me in Italy, where I was helping this small residency in Lecce, Italy, learn how to do my practice through the corners of their body. And I taught them how to do the whole project. And I love putting the slide in here because I had to use local materials and the local material was pasta. So I learned how to make a mold out of hardening pasta, which is awesome. And I like to put this slide in because it's kind of the system that you put down, which is like really about painting for me. There's no right way. I just put them down and I just keep moving them until the composition looks right. And then we zip these up onto the wall. And the result is this. This is at the Albany Museum of Art. And this is a slide from the Brooklyn Museum. So it's quite large and it makes you feel like you're watching it live. And these are recordings, paper recordings from the wall that I peeled off just and framed, which are also at the Brooklyn Museum. So we're moving on to seats. Seats. This is me right here. You can see that patterns and the way that you grow up is sort of what you end up with. But it's interesting also to see how fashion and what have you kind of follows you sometimes. You don't know when it's going to follow you, but eventually it catches up. This is my mom just hanging out with me at Urban Outfitters. I don't know why that's funny to anybody, but it's funny to me too. I was thinking about gods and goddesses seated. Okay. I had access to certain collections and I was kind of looking at South Asian and African seated antiquities. And meanwhile was preparing to make a series of seats out of the shapes of like seatedness in body forms for the sculpture center. It was in 2018. So, I hand carved all these seats and used a lot of ephemera, like traditional clothing, prayer rugs and underwear and hijabs and whatever that the things that I had lying around to make the upholstery. And the reason I chose that Matisse is the piece that I did for In Practice in 2018 at the Sculpture Center. So the reason I used that material is because I was trying to transform this kind of like hoarding that my mom has the propensity to do, and like that hoarding kind of it's like handed off to me, right? And I don't know what to do with these bags and bags and bags of clothes that I'm never going to wear. And I find myself 10, 15 years later moving from house to house to house with these bags. And eventually I'm like, let me just transform it. So in a way, I'm really thinking about transitional spaces, whether they're cutouts, archways, or like the transformation of a material itself from one use to the other. How do I get out of this slide? Okay, so after a site-specific show such as this, I started thinking about how, well, also another detail is these are musical cabinets that are synced to these videos, and this was karaoke room. And when you sat down on them, your butt titillated because the subwoofers were in there. And that's an experience that one will have at the Moody Arts Center soon when that show opens, or in Cincinnati when it opens in Cincinnati. So I started to take the tops off of these works because I wanted to, if the sculpture is a three-dimensional form and we can think about objectification, when you take the tops off and put them on the wall, you can maybe start thinking about the philosophy of painting and think about the gaze. And if you can ask the question of who has comfort, then all of a sudden things get really interesting to me. So that was a really interesting move for me to make, to start taking the tops off and putting them on the wall and still calling them seats. These are earlier works. And display. That's my office at VCU. I'm in there somewhere. And then I started kind of transitioning into just making seats for the wall instead of having them be a part of a cabinet, which was a really great moment for me. So I just really thought about chromes and forms of, again, corners of my body, and really started to like focus on making the work for the wall. And using at times my own sense of hoarding. Everybody went to opening ceremony, I'm sure. And so then another transitional moment happened where I started thinking about seating and seatedness and the comfort one has of being seated or not seated. And I started thinking about, this is at New Haven currently. I started thinking about, yeah, this is it. So it's called House. And there's a person back there printed on this cotton material, and that's to be determined who that is. I think you'll find out. So I started thinking about the seating arrangements itself within the ideas of what I started off with economies and the way in which we think about policies and trade and what have you. So looking at the radial formation of the House of Representatives became really interesting to me. And the yellow dots represent the femme identifying people and the gray dots represent the male identifying people. So I started thinking about my mom again, poor mom. Um, she was a leather maker, so she made leather bags for Neiman Marcus when we were younger. So we would kind of get together to help her make these bags. And I started to just point myself towards these tools again. And I took the tool and I punched out the holes of all the male identifying people, all the gray dots. And then the yellow dots I penciled in kind of like a Scantron. And so the front photo is family photos of family that are in black and white. And the back photo behind the punch out are some of these choice femme identifying people that potentially can change things for my comfort. We don't know, to be determined. And another thing I'm thinking of that's kind of outside of the ideas in the seated works is just making sure I obfuscate form and face. I use my own body a lot in my work. I'm not quite sure how to transition into using the forms of other people. And so oftentimes I obfuscate in a particular way where it's not the main focus, but I try not to like give out too many details of the faces themselves. So in privacy control is also displayed at the Brooklyn Museum right now. And I want to share a project with you that I did right after I graduated school at Cornell. So I graduated in 2012 and I started turning away from painting. It pissed everybody off. But I turned away from painting and I started thinking about these ways in which people are transitioning in and out of the city of Denton, Texas. So my dad had this garage. He wasn't able to drive anymore, so it's pretty empty garage. And so when people had to leave abruptly, they would leave their boxes at times in my dad's garage. And so I started to look at those boxes of people like that might maybe had to like be deported for 3 months before they came back, for example. And I started looking at the faces of the boxes and taking photographs of them and really taking to the details of the way the tape was on the work, the contents of the work, and also the handwriting that was on the work that was basically showing what was the contents were in the box. And I wanted to kind of like share this with you because I'm actually thinking about a work that I'll be doing for the High Line where I'm going to do this kind of like identifying box work again, where I'm going to talk with all the different departments along the High Line, whether it's the landscaping department or the food court or the art department or what have you. And I'm going to go ahead and collect the faces of those boxes and make a lot of like economic connections, social connections, and I'll make a kind of granite outdoor work. So we'll see what happens. But all that to say is I was thinking about privacy and protection and my own kind of family history. And this was that turning point for me in 2013. And so, my family helped build this mosque in Denton, Texas, and the materials themselves are like these two-way mirrors. And I think a lot of people are very familiar with the material in terms of like wanting to give yourself privacy if you have like a lofted home along the highway or what have you, or if you are interested in like cinema and you're watching a crime show and there's this moment where the criminal looks at the mirror and I know somebody's back there, right? You have these like moments that you understand what the material is. This is me sitting in the mosque, looking at myself, looking behind me, looking in front of me. And I thought, wow, if there's like 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, if you divide that into fours, that's still a lot of people that could be having the same visual experience on top of everyone in the city who's having this experience as well. So that's kind of how I hone in on the materials that I want to use. So the material itself, it's a thin film that you can apply onto your windows and you can buy it at Home Depot. It's called Privacy Control. So here I am buying the two-way mirror to create the scaffolding for one of my first iterations. And the text behind it is the last chapters of the Quran. So I'm kind of like suggesting that you can treat this object as essentially like a big selfie stand. You fix your hair, or you can meditate on it until your eyes get adjusted to the light and then you can see through to read the transliteration of the text. And I say transliteration because there's 4 chapters. Most people that follow this religion in a modicum of respect end up memorizing these texts, and these texts are meant for protection. So I've memorized them and I've been reading them throughout the course of my life. And around the time I made this work, I was trying to figure out why the English translation was so weird. Because it's a colonial language. We sit in these colonial languages, right? And so I wanted to transliterate the language in my own way. So I took out the pronouns because he didn't do shit, right? So tired of that stuff. So it's fine. I also looked at like certain texts, like, you know, there's like always these moments, oh, like something happens in the dark, evil comes in the darkness. And I'm like, actually, a lot of evil things happen in the broad daylight too. So let's fix that as well. So, you know, these are examples of the way in which I kind of tried to make myself comfortable with this thing that was sitting in my heart. But then I also used it as a climbing tool because for some reason I like climbing large objects. Um, and you know, if you're lucky, or I'm lucky rather, I can share that work with you. So, you know, if you're sitting in a dark space, I'll emerge and start to climb with the headlamp, and then you can read the text as I move my head back and forth. It's really beautiful. It's kind of lovely. Anyway, maybe I'll do it again sometime. And this is at the Brooklyn Museum. Okay, I'm going to start running through because a lot of this stuff is kind of been situated. You see what I see, you see how I see, and there's a lot of research that goes into it, and a lot of image research and text research. And so, what do I do with all those materials? So I started to make these collages. They started in my kind of home bedroom studio that now I have like a sort of semi-proper studio, but it was just a way for me to really start to understand what I'm doing and categorize myself, and again, kind of get close to thinking about the philosophy of painting. Um, and it's also really helpful to have these works when you're also engaging with my larger installations, because sometimes my large installations can be like they're conceptual. So these pieces kind of work as an addendum to it, or that sometimes they work as a like a bibliography to the larger sculptures. So for example, a larger sculpture would be like when I had the chance to kind of go and think about systems of power in architecture. This is Rome. And then starting to think about other systems of power, and me drawing in the winter again. And then making my own form from all of that research. That's my nephew. I'm gonna see him in a couple of days. He lives in he lives in Texas, but my sister's family lives in Dayton, Ohio. So I'm gonna drive out there. So you know, here I am looking at a Corinthian column. It's a power source. It's a system what you don't even notice, but it's very powerful, and it adorns our banks, our libraries, our museums, our churches. So I wanted to take that powerful form and kind of mess with it, you know, like dissect it and see what I could get. And so I wrapped it with these Kashmiri rugs. And one of the things that's interesting to think about when you're thinking about power in a time like this is that we have these 2 different ways of thinking about what to do with all this power. One philosophy is burn it down, and the other philosophy is like integrate, right? So I feel like one of the important things to remember is you can't really just take a column down because the roof will fall over you. So you can't, I don't know. I mean, it's a philosophical question. It's like, is the dress blue or is the dress red, you know? So I started to look at mosque structures again, and this is a pretty typical mosque. You have your like carpet, and then you have some weird uncle or aunt that has a great idea of a way to hide the column by putting the rug on the column itself. And you see this everywhere. This is in particular, this mosque is the Shabazz Mosque in Harlem. So I kind of like, I'm sharing this stuff with you not to be, you know, I want to be kind of funny because these things can be boring. But I just want to share it with you because like I never really know where my resources come from. It's not always the book or any kind of like scholarly text. Sometimes it comes from like a real personal experience. And oftentimes we think about Oriental rugs and these kinds of like particular patterns and textiles as beautiful, or you know, the ornament itself is something without feeling. Almost, it's a thing that you place on something. So for me, I think that it's important to remember that a lot of these textiles document flora and fauna that don't even exist in the world anymore. The traditions of these patterns are very old. And in places like Kashmir, there's been so much turmoil that even the plants don't appear anymore. They're extinct. So I like to think about history and power imbibed back into these objects that we forget how powerful they are, because they're placed in positions of beauty instead of in positions of power. This is the I Have Arrived work that Tyler was talking about earlier. This is they were commissioned at the Wexner Center, and they're also placed at the Brooklyn Museum. And here's your work. It was a feat. It was crazy to make those during the pandemic, and I didn't get to see this show. But that's okay. This is me again, just looking at the architecture and making these collages and combining different graphic histories together, different antiquities together. And this is a really good example of the way in which I'm starting to incorporate the philosophy of cameraless photography. It's kind of a made up word, but it points to the technology of documenting bodies and the advent of the camera itself. So for me, I'm really interested in anything that can kind of document you in a way that's non-traditional. So scanning materials, 3D printing, and what have you has become really interesting to me. And you know, they're tools of surveillance, but they're also tools that we all want to get our hands on because we want to document ourselves and post them on social media or whatever. So I Have Arrived started here. This was a project that that was very meaningful for me because, you know, I don't know how much I can say because this is in a closed room, but I'll go ahead and say it, and then you guys can either like me or not. That's fine. You know, being asked to do a work at the Wexner Center at that particular time was it was awesome because I needed that kind of support. And working with Lucy, you know, from the Wexner Center was amazing. All that stuff's great. But what I'm trying to say is it was also the peak of the Black Book, like the Jeffrey Epstein book. So it was just like a really bad moment for me to then try to put my work in a space that was deeply involved with that history, because Les Wexner, God bless his soul, did good things, but he also did bad things, just like good things happen at night and during the day, right? And he also owned Victoria's Secret. So for me, I was like thinking about my own entrapment of desire and beauty, um, and the way in which I think most femme people have these impossible tasks of being everything and being highly desirable at the same time. And then with today's technology, we have Facetuner. We can't even really take a photo of ourselves without tuning it. And then we have to go to Mexico and tune our breasts, our lips, our faces. We have to run off to get our nails done, but we're really doing Botox. It's like, I mean, I don't do that, but not yet. But it's like there's just like a lot going on here. Okay. So for me, it was all swirling around in my mind. And it was like I was getting to that age, right, where I'm asking myself these weird questions of mortality. And so I thought the best thing to do is create a body scanner. And the reason why it's so high is because the camera lenses required that kind of length. So there's a little bit of calculus that I had to do. It was really hard because I'm not really good at math. And then the platform was where I sat to make these works. So none of this was photoshopped. And I'm thinking about the Victoria's Secret flora and fauna, for those of you lucky people who have these underwears, and really unpacking the ornamentality of that and bringing it back into the Kashmiri rugs and the documentation of, plants that don't exist any longer and the kind of colonial tactics and what have you. So there's a lot going on there. I'm gonna end it there, but these are really bad photographs of the work, and I'm doing that on purpose because I want you to see how reflective they are. When you put two pieces of plexi on top of each other, they just become even more reflective. So anytime you're looking at these works, you're looking at yourself. But of course, this is what it looks like when you can like have a proper black box and documentation. This projector sucks. These are really good photographs, I promise. Okay, so By Faith is a TV show where I was able to also have a cinematographer film me doing the work. And that's why early on, for those you lucky people looking at my email, I was trying to find the video, couldn't find it. But I am working on the By Faith clips to share with the world for Moody Arts Center. So that's something that's coming up. It's really hard to make a TV show, apparently. So I'm working on that. It's a really long project. It started at the kitchen, and it was like right in the middle of COVID. And so one of the cool things, backstory, is that I ended up making a template of how people in TV can actually work during COVID, because we had to really distill the process of TV because of COVID. So I was really lucky to be able to make this at this particular time, because there were so many cinematographers and audio people who didn't have a job. And so when I started proposing the project, everyone just kind of was like, let's do this. The project itself is about me having COVID, being in my bed, but then imagining all these amazing people coming to me that have been friends to me, good people to me, like looking at plants or painting or going to the beach. All this stuff was happening in my mind. It's kind of like Proust. I mean, Proust wrote all that from his bed. So if he could do it, I could do it. So stay tuned on the TV show. Oh, side note, I'm going to actually be on a real TV show that airs in October. It's going to be humiliating, and I might have to change my hair back to black and move to Mexico. It's called The Exhibit, and it's a 7 artists compete with each other to win money. It's really bad. You can't, like, artists can't compete against one another. So I was like in the producer's room every day, like, you can't say this, you can't do this. We can't compete against each other. The subject matter is injustice. Like, no, I'm not going to compete against my colleagues and make an artwork about injustice. It was crazy. Anyway, stay tuned. Okay, so where are we? We're at the museum. We're doing my drawings. It's winter again. And then I'm thinking about another cameraless photography project, which is me having access to antiquities again and thinking about forms that aren't necessarily seated, but deities that have the S curve to them. So a lot of these deities of power have these like impossible S curves that you are hoping that your daughters and your sons are not doing on Instagram and their Finstagram, right? The like face, tits, and ass photos. Those are really hard to do unless you're a contortionist. So, oh, that's just me and my friends at the museum. So Bust of Cannon ended up being me having to split my torso open and twist and cut my body here in order to actually create that S-curve form from the deities I was looking at the Met Museum and the Brooklyn Museum. So what you see is a body scan and a body print of me. And then that bubble form that's coming out is actually speaker. And the I Am an Archive record that I made sits inside that form. So maybe we can listen to a song while we get through the last of this. We're almost done, sorry. Or I'm going to go back to that and I'm going to fast forward to this real quick because I just want to get you guys out of here so we can have a drink. During Ramadan. Okay, so also I had like I'm saying, the Brooklyn Museum is very generous to me, by the way. I was able to make 4 commissioned works. I'm crazy like that. So I was not only able to kind of look at some of their sculptures, but I was also able to look at a lot of their objects in their Islamic department. So this is called Jingle Johnny, this object. A lot of the objects at the very 9th hour were actually taken from me because the director of the Islamic collection got stuck in Turkey, because this was that moment in time where we all kind of had to sit where we were, right? So I'm over here scrambling, like I've done all this work to kind of make these performance collages with your work, with your antiquities. And now, like, what am I going to do here? So instead of being sad, I was spontaneous and I asked them for the document, the slide. So I had my assistant go and print these off and I made a signboard out of it. So here I am standing in a pink photo booth with the Prickett stand, Jingle Johnny. So it's kind of interesting because this object itself, it's Turkish, and it was meant to be at the lead of when the military comes into the village. So you're supposed to hear the military come, right? With this jingly thing. So it was kind of nice to like void the sound and have this kind of signpost. And then again with the rug, this was a rug that I was working with, but at the end I didn't have access to, so I had it printed and I was able to incorporate my body into it. Although I was able to touch this glass form in 30-second intervals. So the whole project itself was about the do's and don'ts of how intimate I could be with these objects. And for example, if I couldn't touch the object, I would hover over the conservator, or I would make them personalized nitrile gloves. In this case, these are my personalized nitrile gloves for them. Hovering over them with a Prickett stand. And then I placed my iPhone under this lamp and was able to touch it with the light. I don't know, for some reason I can't touch the lamp, but I can put my iPhone under it. And in this moment, I was asked to, not asked, but I wasn't able to put this necklace form onto my body because the enamel was coming off as it was coming out of the conservator's quarter. So we placed it on the ground and we had to go get it printed. But all this to say is the actual law of antiquity itself was a law that was made in the early Americas to prevent monopolization. And so that was also just like a really interesting piece of research that I got to do along with the project to understand the way that in which objects are acquired and what have you as well. So if any of you wondered why people were hoarding materials during COVID, a lot of presidents over the time have changed those laws to where things slip, and you can always find a loophole to monopolize. Okay, so let me go back to the bust so that I can have you listen to music while we're looking at that. Oh, there's me again. Oh, darn. Okay, whatever. I'm not trying to pretend like I know what I'm doing or that this is some kind of a weird outer experience that you're having. So this album, there's about 9 songs, and I've made them, and I don't want to be a pop star, but I really like making music, I guess. I'll play one while we look at the rest of the slides. Do you think it's going to play? Should be. What do you think? Oh, this is why. Okay, maybe that's why. Okay, let's go here. Okay. So she was designed to have this music play from her chest. Play from her chest. Oh, that's a lot of slides, right? Oh, I lied to you. There's like more than 250 slides. Okay, so here we are. So this is like the front entrance of the Brooklyn Museum where you can hear the music. And that's my hair. It actually is something that you can pop out to make ink drawings with. This is process photography. I mean, process photography, it sounds so serious. This is just like drafts to help you understand how I built it. And then the chandeliers themselves also, I did a kind of like a lot of work explaining the portals to you early on from the acoustic blankets. And these are the same patterns and portals that I wanted to bring into the space to kind of talk about the early moments for me where I would like sneak out of my parents' house. Oh God, I hope my parents aren't, oh shit. Anyway, so I would dream about leaving my, whatever, I'm 42, leave me alone. I would dream about exiting the house that I was growing up in, right? To go out and see these shows, because there was like tons of awesome bands playing all the time. You have like, you know, South by Southwest every year, and all these bands are coming through. So I would pop the window out from my apartment and I would go off to see these shows. And there was like a lot of like night culture built into some of the aesthetics that I work with. So that's the room itself was kind of like built to get you to experience the kind of like glamour of being able to experience that, but also the horror of it, because you have desire and surveillance following you at all times. So let me just be quiet so you can hear the song. Alrighty. So, do you guys have any questions or shall we move along? What do you think? Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.